The cranberry sauce was still bubbling like a quiet red sea when his phone lit up again, seventh time before noon, its glow catching the edge of the stainless steel kettle and flashing a small, traitorous sunrise across our kitchen wall. I pretended not to see it. I pretended not to see so many things those days. My hands were buried deep in a bowl of bread cubes and sage, and the smell of butter was the one mercy that kept me anchored to the room. I am 47 years old, a mother of two grown children, and I have been the keeper of every smell, every holiday, every dent in this house for more than 2 decades. My name is Jordan. I am the woman who wakes first and sleeps last, who knows which cupboard door sticks and which stair creaks, who can tell when the heat comes on by the soft breath the vents exhale. Once upon a time, this was enough for me. Or maybe not enough, just everything I knew how to hold. Could you help me with the turkey I called? Because sometimes hope is a reflex that lives in the bones. A moment later came his reply, thin and distracted. In a minute. Taylor stood at the threshold of the kitchen, the screen reflected in his eyes like a portal to a private world. He smiled into it, the curve of his mouth, small and secret like he was trying on a new expression that did not include me. He didn't notice the way I braced the roasting pan against my hip and lifted the way my lower back flared in a sudden arc of heat. He didn't notice how the oven clouded the room with the scent of sage and browned skin, the perfume of the bird that had roasted since dawn, because old recipes are prayers, and I still believed prayers worked. "Mom, this stuffing is insane," Hunter said when he breezed in wearing a navy jacket that made him look like the first draft of the man he'd become. Consulting had rubbed the sleep from his features and left purpose in its place, but his laugh was exactly the boy I used to buckle into car seats. Faith arrived after him, a whirl of warmth and lipstick and graduate school anecdotes, her arms full of wine bottles and bad jokes. She kissed my cheek and told me I smelled like her childhood. It made something tender open in my chest. I set the table with my grandmother's dishes, the delicate blue pattern that only comes out when the calendar is kind to us. I bent the stems of plastic leaves into a cornucopia centerpiece and pretended it looked effortless, like contentment grows by itself if you water it with tradition. Battery candles flickered their confident little lies along the runner. Our house was shining, as if it knew it had one last performance before the curtain dropped. We ate, we laughed. For 3 courses, I almost believed I could set the world right by hand-mashing potatoes the way my mother taught me, leaning my weight into the bowl until the lumps gave up. But every time I looked up, his gaze was maybe a centimeter to the left of mine, trained on a place above my head, or at the corner of the window where the natural light made his phone look even brighter. He jittered his leg under the table. He cleared his throat. He straightened his shoulders. I'd lived beside those tells for 23 years. The man had tells like a card player in a glass room. "Everything okay, Dad?" Faith asked finally, because daughters can smell weather before the sky darkens. "Fine," he said, and tucked the device away like a guilty thought. And then he stood. The simple violence of a chair scraping a hardwood floor can slice a moment in half. He was taller when he stood, or maybe certainty makes a person look taller. He cleared his throat. The triple tolling of the bell I knew too well. Hard truth withheld eye contact, a proclamation rehearsed in private. This was about to happen to us. I have something to tell everyone. Silence isn't empty. It's a crowded room where all the ghosts you've refused to see come back and take chairs. My fork hovered. The smallest quiver of gravy made an isthmus across the white of my plate. "I'm selling the house." The words were neat and tidy and executed like he'd clipped them from a contract. The house, the one that held our children's height marks on the kitchen door frame and the scratched paint from a Christmas tree that got dragged in at the wrong angle. The one where I learned my children's fevers by the heat against my cheek and could navigate the hall in the dark by the geography of rugs alone. You cannot sell a house like ours. You can strip it, abandon it, betray it. But you cannot sell it as if it were merely wood. What Faith whispered, but he pressed on like a man halfway across a rickety bridge who decides the only mercy is speed. "Holly and the kids need more space," he said. "Her apartment is too small. They need stability, a real home." He said her name in our dining room. He said it in the tone people use when they introduce a beloved guest, not a wrecking ball. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard the syllables that came after that apology of a laugh he did when he got caught. Holly from Accounting Holly with good ideas. Holly who needed advice. But it was the first time our children did. It is a kind of death to watch your children's faces change like that. Hunter went still, the calculations of a grown man stacked up quickly behind his eyes. Faith's mouth fell open and made her look for one terrible moment like a little girl again. "We've been together for 8 months," he continued, voice bright with that brittle optimism people use when selling a doomed product. "She has 3 kids, Jack and Joel and little Elise. They're good kids. They need a yard. Good schools. I found a place in Westfield, 5 bedrooms, 3 baths. What about us?" The words were so small out of Faith that I barely heard them above the clock ticking in the hallway. "What about Mom?" And I watched him finally look at me. He had a defiant look, ready, the one men make when they need you to be the villain so they can be the hero who walks away. I didn't offer him a single line of that play. I stood. I walked to the kitchen. My purse rested where I'd left it between the salt cellar and a folded dish towel that still smelled of lemon. My hands didn't shake as I took out the cream envelope I'd carried for 3 weeks waiting. Maybe I'd been waiting for the worst moment, which it turns out has excellent timing. I placed the envelope beside his plate on the gravy stain he'd made while marking up our lives. "Since you're making announcements," I said, and I sat down and took a bite of sweet potato that tasted like soot. "Control can look like calm if you wear it right." He reached for the envelope and felt its weight like it had mass beyond paper. "What is it?" Dad, Hunter asked, never looking away from him. My son's voice had an edge I'd never heard. It cut the room into a before and an after. Taylor turned the envelope over and saw his name written in my cursive, the same hand that once scrawled birthday cards and phone numbers on sticky notes, and he felt the distance between those relics and this thing he was about to open. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, relief passing over his features like shade. Postponement is a coward's prayer. He sat down again. He sipped water as if it were the polite thing to do at an execution. "How long has Holly been helping you make decisions about our home?" I asked, which is the gentlest way to ask a man when he decided you were merely a tenant in your own life. His fork clattered. Not now, he tried. But we were past now. We were at the unspooling. Faith set her glass down too hard and flinched at the sound. "You're really leaving Mom. For some woman with kids." The word "some" was a raft she couldn't let herself step on, because if she named the woman it would name the wound. "It's complicated," he said, and I wanted to laugh. Complicated is a way people decorate a simple wrong. That was when the phone vibrated across the table, a frantic beetle on the wood. He looked at it, and her name flashed shameless and bright. Holly. I could almost admire her persistence wielding the tool that had escorted her into our marriage. It buzzed again and again and again. "Answer," I said softly. A kindness sharp enough to draw blood. "Your priorities are calling." He declined. He flushed. The phone buzzed a 4th time, and he caved to the way gravity always works on men who are falling. He picked the thing up, whispered, "I can't talk right now," and turned his face away. We could still hear her voice sharpened to a point. Hunter pushed his chair back, napkin falling to the floor like a small white flag he had no intention of picking up. "I've lost my appetite," he said, and the disappointment in his voice was the kind that can't be fixed by dessert. 23 years, he added to Taylor, "and you announce your affair at Thanksgiving, like it's a quarterly report." He left the room. We listened to his footsteps climb the stairs and stop at his childhood door, a click that sounded like a past closing. Daddy Faith whispered a name she hadn't used since she was small enough to sleep with her feet tucked under my rib cage. "How could you do this to us?" He almost broke then. I saw something human crack through him. Regret. Then the phone buzzed again, and he sealed himself back up. She excused herself to the porch because there wasn't enough oxygen left at the table for a daughter who needed to breathe. After they went, it was just him and me across the china and the candles, the ghosts polite enough to keep their hands folded in their laps. He tried for words. I stacked plates. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I said, the smallest word, an oar that can still push a boat far from shore. That night, I slept with the bedroom door locked for the first time in our marriage, and I slept well. Morning came like some clean, shy animal and tiptoed across the floorboards. The house was empty. He had left before dawn. I made coffee and let the quiet in. It had been months since I let quiet into my body. It filled the places his lies had widened. Memory works like a dimmer switch. You think you turned it down, and then with one small motion it floods you. When I finally stopped making excuses for his absences and leaned into them, a chronology assembled itself. March, he started coming home late with apologies that sounded pre-printed. April, he canceled our plans with emergencies that looked suspiciously scheduled. July, Faith called and said she'd seen her father at the park with a woman and 3 kids, and it looked like a family if you didn't know better, if you didn't know worse. I sat in the dark living room after that call with my hands cold and my mouth so dry I could have sworn there was dust swirling where breath should go. In September, he introduced the word downsize into breakfast, like it was a vitamin we should all start taking. In October, on our anniversary, he missed dinner because she had a crisis and needed him. And I wore the black dress anyway and took myself to the restaurant where he once proposed, and I ordered a good bottle of wine and toasted the woman who would soon save me. By then, I'd already met with a lawyer whose office smelled like expensive wood and privacy, a man who understood that some wars need strategy and patience, not fury. I gathered what needed gathering: bank statements, photos taken from feeds that wanted to be seen, receipts that told a story their numbers didn't understand. I kept it all in a safety deposit box under a fake name that made me feel invisible and powerful. I moved through my days in a new kind of quiet, the quiet of a woman laying track for a train no one else hears yet. A week after Thanksgiving, on a Thursday bright as a clean plate, he came down the stairs with the cream envelope clutched in both hands. His eyes were red. His hair looked like he'd slept in it wrong and argued with the mirror that morning. "What is this?" he asked, as if the weight of paper could be a trick. "Open it," I said, flipping a pancake with a sang-froid I had earned. He opened it. He read. The silence between us changed species. "You transferred the deed," he said at last, his voice a ghost of itself. "3 months ago," I said. "Amazing what people don't notice when they're busy." He swallowed. "You set me up." "I protected myself," I said. "There's a difference." I could feel the shape of my life changing, even as I stood there in bare feet frying breakfast. "You promised her a house that was never yours to give," I added gently, because truth delivered plainly is its own scalpel. His phone rang again. He answered it this time, and I listened to him try to explain to the woman who needed stability that he had tried to give away something that did not belong to him, and I watched the color drain from his face as she understood. The call ended. The texts came like hail. He stared at me across the kitchen, a man who had tripped every wire and still thought he could ask why the alarms were loud. 23 years, he murmured, and you destroy it with paperwork. I set the spatula down and looked at him. Really looked as if I were meeting the man who had been standing in my doorway for months. "I didn't destroy our marriage," I said. "You gave a stranger our address and asked her to move in." He left that morning like he was late for a meeting, the envelope still trembling in his hand, the coffee cooling untouched. I listened to the car door slam, the tires crunching against the frost-slick driveway, and the quiet that followed felt almost holy. The house exhaled. It was as if it had been holding its breath through months of deceit, and now that the truth had burst through the walls themselves could finally rest. I sat at the table staring at the faint ring his mug had left on the wood. It's funny what remains after a storm: small stains, crooked frames, and echoes of words you can't quite scrub away. I ran my finger over that faint circle and thought, this is all that's left of him in this room, a mark that fades every time I wipe it. But grief doesn't fade like stains do. It rearranges itself. It hides in the familiar. I washed the dishes one by one, methodically letting my mind replay the last 23 years, like an old home movie with scratches and skips. The laughter, the birthdays, the nights he fell asleep on the couch, while I folded laundry and thought that love was simply endurance. I'd spent years thinking a good marriage was about being steady, being the glue, the patient one. But glue can only hold so long when one piece keeps slipping away. That day, the quiet was my friend. I made another pot of coffee, opened the curtains, and finally let the light touch the spaces I'd been avoiding: the corners of our kitchen, the framed photos, the reflection of a woman who looked older than she remembered. My hair was pulled back loosely, silver threads just visible near my temples. When did that happen? When had I stopped noticing myself entirely? The first time I realized Taylor was lying to me, it wasn't a grand discovery. It was small, almost delicate, the kind of betrayal that whispers instead of screams. A late night at work. A half-second pause before a kiss goodnight. The smell of someone else's perfume faint enough to make me doubt my own senses. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It seeps in quietly like water under a door. I remember the night I found the photo. I'd been scrolling through his phone to check the weather. It was such an innocent moment, the kind you don't think twice about until your world rearranges itself around a single image. Her face, her children, her laughter caught in the act of belonging somewhere she didn't. There was a little girl with pigtails sitting on Taylor's lap, her tiny hand gripping his shirt. He was smiling a genuine smile, the kind he hadn't worn around me in months. I stared at that photo for a long time. My hand shook, but not from shock. No, it was recognition. I'd been expecting this moment without admitting it. When I confronted him, he didn't flinch. "She's a colleague," he said, calm and condescending, like I was the one being unreasonable. "She's going through a hard time. Those are her kids." His tone carried that dangerous righteousness men wear when they want to silence you with their decency. I almost believed him. Almost. But after that, every excuse began to glow under the same light. The late nights, the client dinners, the sudden work trips that left no trace on his calendar. By summer, Faith had seen him at the park laughing and pushing another woman's daughter on a swing. She'd described it so innocently on the phone that night, not realizing she'd pierced me through the chest. "He looked happy, Mom," she'd said. Like, really happy. That was the night I stopped being blind. I started keeping records, not out of vengeance, but survival. Screenshots, statements, little breadcrumbs of the life he thought he was clever enough to live in secret. My lawyer Clayton called it building a foundation. I called it arming myself with truth. I opened a safety deposit box under my maiden name and stored everything there. Every receipt, every suspicious withdrawal, every photo, every piece of proof that said, "You thought I wasn't watching." But I was. Clayton told me something that day that I'll never forget. He leaned back in his chair, his silver hair catching the sunlight, and said, "Men like your husband don't think they're lying. They think they're editing the truth to make it more comfortable." And he was right. Taylor had rewritten our story in his head so many times that he believed his version more than reality. He saw himself as the hero rescuing a single mother and her children from struggle. He'd cast himself in a role that made his betrayal noble, but I wasn't playing the part of the helpless wife anymore. When I walked into that law office for the first time, I felt small, afraid, scared, still hoping it was all a misunderstanding. But when I walked out, I felt something I hadn't in years: power. Quiet, steady, patient power. The kind that doesn't shout or throw plates. The kind that signs papers in advance and waits for the right moment to let them speak. And that moment came at Thanksgiving, right there, between the cranberry sauce and the sweet potatoes. After he left that morning with his envelope of reckoning, I spent the day reclaiming my house inch by inch. I opened every window, aired out the scent of him. I washed the sheets, vacuumed the rug he'd always said was too bright, rearranged the living room just to remind myself that I could. Small rebellions can feel like revolutions when you've spent years walking on eggshells. Faith called that afternoon, her voice careful. "Mom, are you okay?" It's strange how the truth sounds when you say it for the first time. "I'm fine," I told her, and I meant it. The word didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like the start of something real. The days that followed were almost peaceful until Thursday morning came again, and Taylor's footsteps found their way back into my kitchen. I could feel the weight of his presence before he spoke. Guilt has a temperature, and it changes the air. He held the papers from the envelope, his fingers trembling. "You transferred the deed," he said, voice caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. "Yes," I said, flipping a pancake, the sound of butter sizzling like punctuation. "3 months ago." You set me up. I protected myself. There's a difference. His phone started ringing again. Holly! I could hear her voice through the small speaker, shrill and frantic, asking when the move-in date was. I leaned against the counter, watching the man I'd built my life around unravel like cheap thread. When the call ended, his shoulders slumped, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him without the armor of ego. Just a man who'd gambled everything and lost. 23 years, he whispered, and you destroy it with paperwork. I turned to face him, finally letting my voice rise, not in volume but in truth. No, Taylor. You destroyed it when you decided my loyalty was permanent no matter what you did. You destroyed it when you made me invisible while you built a new life right in front of me. He flinched. Good. Let him feel something real for once. That night, he tried calling Hunter and Faith, leaving long voicemails that none of them returned. Hunter answered on the fourth try, his tone clipped. We're standing with Mom. By the weekend, I was hosting my book club in the same kitchen he'd once promised to another woman. The air was lighter, the laughter genuine. You seem peaceful, my friend Margaret said. I stopped holding my breath, I told her, and for the first time it felt true. The papers came in February. He filed first, of course. He did a final grasp at control. I signed them with steady hands. I didn't even cry. There was no need. You only cry when something dies. What we had wasn't dead, it had been gone long before. Spring arrived softly, like it didn't want to disturb the ruins of what had fallen apart. I remember standing on the back porch one morning, coffee in hand, the air cool enough to raise goosebumps on my arms, and realizing for the first time in months that silence could sound like peace. No more half-heard phone calls behind closed doors, no more tension vibrating through the walls, just birds and wind and the faint hum of my own breathing. Taylor had moved out in January. He took his suits, his laptop, and the watch I'd given him for his 40th birthday. Everything else he left behind, as though our life together were just excess luggage he couldn't be bothered to carry. His absence wasn't a void, it was space. Space that filled with things I'd forgotten I loved, the radio on, while I cooked my own laughter echoing off empty rooms, sunlight falling where his shadow used to linger. I'd been so afraid of being alone. But it turned out that alone was better than living as a ghost in someone else's story. By March, the news came through, Faith hesitant and edged with disbelief. Mom, she'd said, you're not going to believe this, Dad's getting remarried. Remarried. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. The divorce papers weren't even dry, and already he was writing a new chapter on top of the ashes of the old one. To Holly, I asked, who else? Faith's voice carried both exhaustion and pity. She's telling everyone they're soulmates. The wedding's in June. I set my mug down and stared at the garden I'd just started planting. The roses I'd chosen were pale pink, the same color as the ones from my wedding bouquet 23 years earlier. Now they looked more like proof of irony than romance. He was 51, she was 32. I suppose some men mistake youth for redemption. Maybe he thought starting over would erase what he'd done. But life doesn't work like that. You don't get to rewrite a story without acknowledging the wreckage you left behind. Faith's voice pulled me back. He invited us, she said quietly. Invited you? Both of us, me and Hunter, formal invitations. The idea of him sitting at some glossy table licking envelopes and sealing them with confidence made my stomach twist. Are you going? I asked. I don't know, she said. Part of me wants to see the spectacle. Part of me wants to throw wine at his shoes. Maybe just watch, I said softly. Let karma pour the wine. After that call, I spent hours in the garden digging, pruning, pulling weeds that had grown wild during the chaos. There's something grounding about dirt under your nails. It reminds you that things grow again even after being cut down. But something about that marriage announcement didn't sit right. Holly had 3 children already. Why the sudden rush to remarry? The gossip trickled in through whispers and Facebook posts. She wanted another baby. She wanted to expand their family. I could almost hear her chirping in that bright voice of false cheer, painting over cracks with promises. I wasn't jealous. That surprised me. I wasn't angry either, not anymore. What I felt was curiosity. A strange, calm curiosity, the kind that comes when you know the truth is walking toward someone else now. Then one day in May, I saw her. I was at the pharmacy picking up vitamins when I heard her voice, unmistakably sweet and sharp at the same time. She was in the next aisle talking on her phone. I didn't mean to listen, but her words carried easily. The custody agreement requires proof, she was saying, irritation threading through her tone. If I want to move the kids out of state, I need to show that my new husband can provide for additional children, financially and biologically. My fingers tightened around the bottle I was holding. Biologically. I remembered something a night long ago, right after Faith was born. Taylor had come home from a doctor's appointment looking unsettled. He'd said it was routine, nothing serious. He hadn't wanted to talk about it, and I hadn't pressed. But now, like a thread pulled from a sweater, that memory unraveled the rest. When I got home, I stared at my phone for nearly an hour before dialing. Dr. Martinez's office, the receptionist answered. "This is Jordan Davidson," I said, steady and calm. "I need to speak with Dr. Martinez about something confidential regarding my husband's old records." He came on the line a few minutes later, his voice warm, familiar. "He delivered both of my children. Jordan," he said kindly. "How have you been?" "I've been better," I said truthfully. "Doctor, I need to ask, do you still have Taylor's medical file from after Faith's birth?" A pause. "That would have been 24 years ago. But yes, we keep files for 30. "Why do you ask?" I hesitated, then spoke. "Because he's getting remarried, and his fiancée wants children." The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. "Jordan," he said finally, choosing his words carefully, "you know I can't share confidential information. But if certain records were requested through legal channels, they'd still exist." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there staring at the kitchen tiles until their pattern blurred. That evening I called Clayton. "I need one last favor," I said. Within a week, the paperwork was filed. Taylor's medical records were subpoenaed as part of the ongoing divorce settlement standard procedure. Clayton said, "Perfectly legitimate." I didn't even need to explain why. He trusted me enough to know I had my reasons. Those reasons arrived in a manila envelope sealed with the weight of 24 years of lies. I didn't open it myself. I didn't have to. Clayton's team ensured that the records would be delivered directly to Taylor on his wedding day. Not out of spite, out of balance. I didn't go to the wedding. I spent that Saturday morning in my garden planting new roses where his golf clubs once leaned in the garage. The sun was warm, the soil soft. Somewhere across town there would have been music, flowers, a rented hall filled with people clinking glasses and believing in new beginnings. Until the truth arrived. At 4:30, my phone rang. Faith's number. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained laughter, "the wedding's off." I leaned back against the porch railing. "Oh." Holly opened some medical records right before the ceremony. "Apparently Dad forgot to mention that he can't have children." I closed my eyes, the sunlight warm on my face. "That's unfortunate, Mom." Faith hesitated. "You didn't—" "Your father's medical history is his own business," I said simply. "If he chose not to share it with his fiancée, that's between them." Faith exhaled a sound halfway between disbelief and admiration. "Karma has excellent timing." "Yes," I said quietly. "She usually does." That evening, Hunter and Faith came over. We opened a bottle of wine, the same one I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on the porch watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. Taylor was somewhere else in the city, probably sitting in an empty banquet hall surrounded by flowers no one would see, realizing that some mistakes echo louder than apologies ever could. We didn't toast revenge that night, we toasted survival. And for the first time in years, the clink of our glasses didn't sound like the end of something. It sounded like the beginning. The summer after the canceled wedding felt like a second kind of spring. Not in the calendar sense, but in my own bones. Everything that had been frozen inside me began to thaw. I started sleeping through the night again, no longer waking to phantom sounds of Taylor's phone buzzing on the nightstand, or the whisper of his shoes on the stairs at midnight. The house, once haunted by tension, now breathed differently. I repainted the walls in soft tones, sage green in the living room, pale ivory in the hallway. The colors felt like forgiveness without words. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming in the kitchen while making coffee. Just small tunes, pieces of songs I didn't even realize I remembered. Hunter teased me for it once when he came home for a visit. "You're lighter," he said. "Like you've been carrying a boulder so long you forgot what it's like to stand up straight." He was right. The weight had been so constant that its absence felt foreign at first, like learning how to breathe new air. By September, I had learned how to live quietly again. Not the kind of quiet that hides pain, but the kind that makes space for joy to return. I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, helping women navigate legal paperwork, property settlements, custody forms, all the little bureaucratic knives that keep wounds open. I knew their stories before they told them. The patterns were universal: a husband who lied, a lover who promised, a woman who stayed until she couldn't anymore. One afternoon, a woman about my age sat across from me, twisting her wedding ring until her finger turned pale. "How do you stop hating him?" she asked. I thought for a long moment before answering. "You don't," I said softly. "You just stop feeding the hate, it starves itself." The truth is, I didn't forgive Taylor, not in the storybook sense, but I let him fade. And sometimes letting someone fade is the closest thing to forgiveness there is. Autumn came early that year. Leaves began to bronze before October had even started, and with them came the invitation that felt like a quiet full-circle moment: Hunter and Sarah's engagement party. The cream-colored envelope lay on my kitchen counter, embossed with gold lettering that caught the afternoon sun. My son's name written in his steady, confident handwriting made my throat tighten. Life moves forward whether we're ready or not. I smiled as I read the details: the country club. The same one where he'd learned to swim as a boy, the first place Taylor ever taught him how to stand tall in water deeper than he thought he could handle. It felt symbolic somehow. That Hunter had chosen this place to mark a new chapter, a reminder that we don't have to erase our history to outgrow it. When I arrived that day, the sky was an impossible blue, the air crisp, almost celebratory by itself. I wore a navy dress and the pearl earrings my mother had given me. My reflection in the mirror that morning had surprised me, not because I looked younger, but because I finally looked like someone I recognized again. Sarah met me at the entrance, radiant and kind, with that same spark in her eyes that had drawn Hunter to her. "You look beautiful," she said, hugging me tightly. "So do you," I whispered back. Hunter chose well. The venue was filled with laughter and the soft clinking of glasses. Faith was there too, glowing with that fierce independence she'd earned through fire. She waved me over, beaming. "Mom," she said, "you've got to see the cake. Sarah designed it herself. It's architectural art." I laughed, genuinely laughed, and for a moment it struck me how different my laughter sounded now. Not polite, not restrained, free. Then halfway through the cocktail hour I saw him. Taylor stood near the entrance, looking smaller somehow. The confident stride was gone. He moved like a man uncertain of his place in a room he once owned. His hair was grayer, his posture slightly bent. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit right. Maybe it was old, or maybe it was simply tired. When his eyes found me across the room, he froze. Our gaze held for a long second, not with anger, not even regret, but with the kind of mutual acknowledgement that comes after too many storms. Hunter noticed him next. I saw the way his expression shifted, the old resentment softening around the edges. He excused himself from Sarah's side and crossed the room to his father. They spoke quietly. Taylor's head bowed slightly, as if in apology. Sarah joined them, then Faith. I watched from a distance as my children made a choice I'd prayed they would make. One day, the choice to be kind even to those who hurt them. After a few minutes, Hunter gestured toward me. Taylor turned hesitant. I gave a small nod. No words, just permission to exist in the same air for a while. Later, I found myself standing on the terrace, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the sun fall over the golf course, where so many of our old Saturdays had disappeared. It looked different now, smaller, almost gentle. Maybe it always was. Maybe it was just me who had changed. "Mind if I join you?" Clayton's voice came from behind me. I turned and smiled. "You made it," I said. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, handing me another glass. "You seem at peace." "I am," I said, and realized it was true. Inside, through the large windows, I could see my children, my grown, beautiful children, laughing together, rebuilding something I'd thought might never mend. Taylor stood a few feet away from them, tentative but grateful, the ghost of arrogance gone. "This is what healing looks like," Clayton said quietly beside me. "It's messy," I said, smiling, "but it's real." We stood there for a long while, watching the night arrive slowly, deliberately, the air cooling as the lights inside glowed warmer. I felt something then, not victory, not revenge, but release. The realization that the best revenge was not destruction at all. It was reconstruction. It was building something new out of what was broken, and living so fully that the past no longer had power to name you. I looked at the man beside me, at the party inside, and at the horizon that stretched wide and unclaimed. I used to think endings were tragic, I said softly. But maybe they're just quiet beginnings. Clayton smiled. Maybe they always were. And as the last of the daylight slipped beneath the trees, I felt the story of my marriage settle into its final place, not as a wound but as a lesson. I'd learned that sometimes losing everything isn't a tragedy at all. It's just life clearing the ground, so you can finally plant something that will grow. So, to anyone listening to this, if you've ever been broken, betrayed, or left behind, remember this: you are not the ashes. You are what rises after. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories, like mine, stories about strength, heartbreak, and the unexpected beauty that comes after. Tell me in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. Maybe it was the envelope. Maybe it was the silence that followed. Either way, thank you for listening.